One of the great things about SQL Server stored procedures, and in fact the stored procedures found in many other server databases such as Oracle, is their support for parameters. Stored procedures with parameters are much more flexible and reusable than ones without parameters. SQL Server Reporting Services provides excellent support for parameters that works hand in hand with the parameter support of your database's stored procedures. You can even use report parameters without stored procedures. Now you're going to learn about how report parameters work and how to take best advantage of them. When you create a report based on a parameterized stored procedure, Reporting Services maps each of the stored procedure's parameters to report parameters. This gives you the option to prompt users for parameters when the reports run. And when Reporting Services creates a report parameter, it uses the same name as the parameter in the stored procedure. But it's important to understand that it drops the leading @ character that's used with SQL Server parameters. What I'm going to do here is create a stored procedure that takes a parameter. Stored procedure is called select customer by country. So as you can imagine, the parameter is a country value. And then I'll create a report based on that stored procedure. And so the report will allow the user to filter the data in the report by country. Okay, so here I have a SQL file opened up within Management Studio. File's called select customer by country. And as you can see, it's going to create a stored procedure in the AdventureWorks LT 2012 database. Checks to see if it's there and it drops it. And then it creates the stored procedure. Fairly simple stored procedure. It selects some fields, mainly from the customer table, and then does some inner joins in order to get the address information. The important thing here for our purposes is that it requires a country region parameter value, and that's an nvarchar 50. And then within the script file, I also include this test, so you can immediately test it to see if it works. Alright, so I already have the database context set to the AdventureWorks LT 2012 database, so I'll go ahead and execute this code, and everything executed successfully, and the test runs, and you can see the kind of data that we get. Get company name, contact information, contact name, address information, and so forth. Alright, so now I'll go over here into SQL Server Data Tools where I have this parameters project open. So I'll come over here and create a new report. So by the way, in the files that accompany this video, there's a completed version of the report that I'm about to create. So you can look at my finished version of the report. Alright, I'm going to create a new report. I'm not going to use the wizard, so I'll select Add New Item. I'll select Report. And I'm going to name the report Customer Country Param, just to make it clear that this is a report that produces a list of customers by country and requires a parameter. Nothing magic about the name, it's just what I chose to name it. Click on Add, and it'll create the report. Okay, so the report opens up in the Designer. I'll come over here to the toolbox, and I'll drag a Table Data region onto the report surface. So Visual Studio sees that I'm adding a table. It doesn't have a data set associated with it, and so it opens up the Dataset Properties dialog box. So I'll come up here and I'll name it Select Customer by Country Dataset. And I'm going to use a data set that's embedded within the report. So I need to create a data source. I don't have one yet within this report. So I'll click on New. And I'll name the new data source AdventureWorks LT 2012. Again, a convention I use to name it the same as the database, but that's certainly not necessary. All right, I'm going to use an embedded connection. It's going to go to SQL Server. But actually, I'm going to use a shared data source reference here. Because within this project, I've already created a shared data source to the AdventureWorks LT 2012 database. So I'll just go ahead and select that. I don't need to recreate it here. All right, that's all I need to do to use a shared data source. And so now I'll use that data source right there. All right, now it's time to define the query that I'm going to use in order to access the data from the database. But I'm not going to use an ad hoc query here. Instead, I'm going to select the stored procedure, and from this drop-down list, I can select the Sales LT Select Customer by Country stored procedure. That's that stored procedure that I just created within that database. Okay, so that's really all I need to do. As usual, there's various other things I can do, various things I can set and so forth here. But one thing that I'll do here is I'm going to open up the Query Designer after I select the stored procedure. And what that allows me to do is come over here and execute the query. And as you can see, it prompts me for a value of the parameter. Stored procedure requires a parameter, so I have to supply one. And so the parameter value that I'm going to supply here, I'll use Canada. That's one of the countries within the database. And by the way, if there were multiple parameters that were required by the stored procedure, those would all be listed, and I would have to provide a value for any required parameters. I'll click on OK, and there you can see the data. So there are all our Canadian customers, and it looks like everything is working fine. So I'll click on OK, and click on OK to create the data set here. All right, so now if we look at the report data window, you can see that we have a data source. So that's using that shared data source within the project that I had previously defined when I created the project. And then now we have a data set that's called Select Customer by Country, and it has all of the fields that are returned by that stored procedure. Now, what's also interesting here is that if you expand the parameters folder here, you'll see that we now have a country region parameter. The report designer created this automatically for me because I'm using a stored procedure that has a required parameter. So I didn't have to do anything in order to get that functionality. All right, so now it's time to start actually creating the report. All right, so I'm going to drag over the customer ID and the company name and the contact name. Notice that I included data, both the first name and the last name, but I also have a calculated field with contact name, and I'll use that in the report. And then the city. Oops, didn't want to put that outside of the report. Right there, or outside the table. And the state province. And the postal code. And I'll put the country in the last column there. I'll go ahead and put that in the upper left-hand corner. All right, so that's all the fields that I want. I'll select the header row here, and I'll make that bold. And then also widen some of the columns. I won't spend a lot of time getting this perfectly right, but company name definitely needs more room. Contact name needs some more room. City does as well. I'll get rid of that window. State's probably fine. Country region might need a little bit more room, so I'll widen that a bit. Okay. So normally I'd probably go back and forth and really refine how that report looks. Okay, so that's the report design. So now I'll go ahead and preview the report. That saves the report definition, so that little asterisk goes away right there. And it takes a moment, just going out, accessing the database. And then as you can see, because this report has a parameter, before it displays any results, I need to enter something here. So I'll test it with United Kingdom. So I enter that, and then I can either press enter or click on this View Report button. It goes out, executes the stored procedure with that value, and as you can see, we get all of the United Kingdom customers. And scroll down. As you can see, we have pretty much a single full page of United Kingdom customers. Then I can go back up here and enter a different value for the parameter. This time I'll press enter, and it goes out and gets all of the Canadian customers. So as you can see, you have this nice feature here where you can enter whatever value you want. And then if I try something like this, the table doesn't happen to have any customers from Mexico, and I'll press enter, and as you can see, we get no records back. All right, so that's not a real great user experience, so I can come back over to the design and select the tablets here. and go into the Properties window and come down here. I'm going to group those by category. I can come down here to the, well, actually I'll look at these by section there. A little bit easier to come to that. And what I can do here is enter an expression that displays a message when there are no rows within the report. So I'm going to say there are no customers available in, and then I'm going to use the parameters collection in order to get access to the parameter value that the user entered. So I'll use parameters and bang. And the only parameter in that collection is country region, so I can select that and hit the tab key. And then I want to use the value for that. Okay, so there are no customers available in, and at execution time, reporting services will populate that value, grab the value of that parameter, and display it within the report. So I'll click on OK there and preview the report again. And I'll once again type in Canada to make sure that we haven't done anything to mess up the report. That looks good. And then do use Mexico. And now we get this nice message saying there's no customers available in Mexico. And the report designer has full capabilities for formatting that. So I could put it in red, I can increase the font size, do all kinds of things in order to display that information to the user.